Oak Island is small. You could walk across it. And for 231 years, people have been digging holes in it, and they still have not run out of places to dig. What comes out of those holes is what this video is about. Not gold, fragments, a scrap of sheepskin smaller than a grain of rice with 2 letters written on it in India ink. Tons of tropical coconut husk buried under a cold Nova Scotia beach, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest coconut. A small lead cross whose metal appears to have come out of a mountain range in southern France. And in 1971, 3 men in a plywood shed watching a live camera feed from 212 feet down, looking at what they believed was a severed human hand. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because number 1 is the only find that turns this place from an engineering puzzle into a grave. 2 people, 2 continents, 1 hole. You should hit subscribe if you like these deep dives into places that refuse to explain themselves, because it helps us keep going. Today we are counting down 10 things found inside Oak Island's money pit and what they actually prove. Number 10. The Roman sword. The find that rewrote history for 6 weeks. In December 2015, the world learned that Romans had reached Nova Scotia roughly 1,500 years before Columbus. By late January, the world had unlearned it. The claim came from a treasure promoter named J. Hutton Pulitzer, built around an alleged Roman shipwreck off the island and a bronze votive sword said to have been pulled from the water nearby. The announcement did not go to an archaeological journal. It went to the Boston Standard, a small English regional paper with a weekly circulation of about 10,000. It traveled anyway. Pre-Columbian contact is a story a lot of people want, and this one arrived pre-packaged. Then it came apart, and it took about a fortnight. Near-identical cast replicas of that exact style of votive sword turned out to be on sale on eBay and Amazon, including replicas issued by the Museum of Naples. Anthropologist Andrew White, then at the University of South Carolina, pointed out that Pulitzer was still working to verify a sword he had already called 100% confirmed. Metallurgical testing pointed at a modern cast. In January 2016, the Curse of Oak Island delivered its own on-air verdict against it. Sky History, the show's own broadcaster, still lists the Roman sword in its roundup of Oak Island's top discoveries. Specifically to say it was a replica, there is nothing to visit. The wreck has never been confirmed. The sword's present location is not publicly documented, which is a polite way of saying nobody is asking. 6 weeks of rewritten history, and the people who stood to gain most from it being real are the ones who filed the correction. Number 9. The 3 links of gold chain. The only treasure ever found, and nobody alive has seen it. In 231 years, the money pit has produced exactly one object anybody could reasonably call treasure. 3 small links of gold chain. They are gone. 45 years passed after the first serious excavation before the Truro Company arrived in 1849. Their opening move was to re-excavate the shaft to 86 feet, where water came in and drove the men out, as it had every time before. So they changed method. Instead of digging, they drilled, using a horse-driven pod auger borrowed from coal prospecting, a tool whose only job is to sample whatever it passes through. What it recorded is the reason this whole story exists. The auger pierced a spruce platform, dropped through an empty space, then cut through oak, then loose metal, then more oak, then more loose metal, then oak and spruce again, before reaching deep clay. To the men reading that sequence, it meant one thing. 2 treasure chests, stacked. Nearly 2 centuries of digging descend from that single interpretation. And on the way up came 3 links of metal resembling an ancient gold watch chain. A later hole produced 3 pieces of copper wire. Here's the thing. Shareholder John Gamble watched foreman James Pitblotto take something off the auger head and slip it into his pocket. Pitblotto said he would show it to the directors at the next meeting. He never turned up. He later tried unsuccessfully to buy land on Oak Island. The Truro Syndicate lost around $40,000 and set off a public obsession that has never really stopped. Nothing of their work survives. The original shaft's exact position was lost when 1960s excavation collapsed the area, and at least one heritage account flags the gold chain story itself as coming from an unconfirmed source. So the only treasure ever recovered from the money pit is an object nobody photographed, nobody weighed, and nobody can produce, described by men who were selling shares. Number 8. The 90-foot stone. The stone that became a fireplace. Then a leather press. Then nothing. For years, the most famous artifact in Oak Island history sat in a Halifax bookbindery being used to flatten leather. It came out of the money pit during the Onslow Company excavation of 1803 and 1804, reportedly at around 90 feet, resting on an oak platform at the deepest point the crew reached before seawater took the shaft. A mid-19th century letter from treasure hunter Jotham B. McCulley describes it: 2 to 3 feet long, 12 to 16 inches wide. Dark, resembling Swedish granite with an olive tinge, and unlike any rock native to the area. It carried an inscription in characters nobody could identify. Nobody in 1804 treated it as evidence. They treated it as a curiosity. It passed to John Smith, who owned the Money Pit land, and Smith set it into his chimney as a fireback. From there it reached the Creighton and Marshall Bookbindery on Upper Water Street in Halifax, where it did 2 jobs. A beating stone for flattening leather in the back, a lure in the shop window at the front. That window is the detail worth holding on to. The stone sat there not as an artifact but as a sales prop, something to look at while somebody talked you into buying treasure hunt shares. Around 1919 it vanished. No rubbing of it exists. No photograph of it exists. Skeptics, including researcher Richard Joltes, regard the published drawings of the cipher as unreliable reconstructions from memory or outright fabrications. The famous translation, 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried, was offered by Reverend A.T. Kempton in 1949, 30 years after the stone disappeared. And the cipher key it relies on cannot be traced back further than the 20th century. There are replicas on the island tour today, carved from remembered drawings. The most quoted sentence in the entire Oak Island story was decoded from an object nobody could check, using a key nobody can source. Number 7. The parchment fragment. 2 letters, smaller than a grain of rice. The most suggestive object ever pulled out of the money pit is smaller than a grain of rice, and it survives because one man could not bring himself to throw away drill spoil. By the 1890s, the pit had defeated 4 companies. The shaft was a flooded ruin, so Frederick Blair's Oak Island Treasure Company drilled instead of digging. At the 153-foot level, the auger came up with the usual mess of borings. Dr. A. E. Porter of Amherst was going through that mess by hand, and in it he found a tiny ball no bigger than a grain of rice. He flattened it under a magnifying glass. It was parchment with ink on it. The scrap was sheepskin, the traditional material for documents meant to last. The letters, written in India ink, have been read as Vi or Ui or possibly Y in a flowing script. The History Channel's own artifact catalog assigns it a date range of 1645 to 1764 at medium confidence. That same drilling season pushed to 170 feet, struck an impenetrable layer, and brought up flecks of gold. A piece of wood recovered later appears to have been stained with vegetable dye, and may be a fragment of the binding the parchment came from. Here's what makes this different from everything else on this list. Gold implies pirates, a document does not. A document implies something written, filed, and meant to be kept. A record, a deed, a charter. Every theory that says the money pit holds something other than treasure, from Templar archives to Shakespearean manuscripts, traces back to this one crumb. The Oak Island Interpretive Center displays material from the search era, though where the fragment itself sits now is not clearly documented anywhere public. 2 letters, a fragment of a word, and more than a century of people building cathedrals on top of it. Number 6. The coins. 400 years of pocket change. On an island nobody lived on. Oak Island has a triangular saltwater swamp near its middle, cobble beaches around its edges, and low ridges of spruce and oak scrub in between. People have been sweeping metal detectors across all of it for decades, and the ground keeps handing back money. More than 40 coins have come out, spanning Roman, medieval, colonial, and post-colonial periods, alongside military buttons, musket balls, iron tools, lead seals, jewelry, and ceramics. The specifics are what make it strange. a Spanish 8 Maravedis dated 1652 came out of the swamp. An 11 Maravedis dated 1598 came out of Smith's Cove in 1965. 2 English coins bearing Charles II, dated 1673 and 1694, came off Lot 16. 7 King George II coppers, minted between 1727 and 1760, came off Lot 24. A British copper, dated 1771, came from the South Shore Cove. Independent summaries list Portuguese and Spanish coins from the 17th century among the confirmed inventory. Nobody is certain whether the 1652 Maravedis was struck in Spain or in New Spain, and some researchers point to privateer or pirate traffic to explain how it got there. But here is the detail that stops people cold. The coins do not lie in a hoard. They lie in zones. Spanish-era money concentrates in the swamp and at Isaac's Point, down by the water. British military material clusters on land that was farmed and lived on Samuel Ball's former properties. That is not the signature of one buried treasure. That is the signature of an island used over and over by different people, doing different things, in different places, across 200 years. None of whom ever met. The coins are held in the island's research collection and shown at the Interpretive Center. Visitors are not permitted to detect. They are the least romantic thing on this list, and the only category you can put in a numismatist's hand and get a straight answer about. If you are finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up. And tell us in the comments which of these you think is actually evidence and which one is just a good story, because we read every single one. We are halfway down the list now, and from here, everything gets colder, deeper, and much harder to explain away. Number 5. The 1769 timbers at Smith's Cove. The date that broke the legend. Tree rings do not negotiate. Dendrochronology matches a wood sample's growth pattern against a regional master chronology and returns the year the tree was cut down. Not a range. A year. Smith's Cove sits at the east end of the island. A shallow cobble cove facing the open Atlantic, gray water, seaweed, tidal flats that empty twice a day. For 2 centuries, whatever lay under that beach was assumed to be part of the booby trap, an ancient flood system built by whoever buried the treasure, feeding seawater 500 feet inland into the money pit. In 1970, Dan Blankenship built a cofferdam there and found a U-shaped timber structure. In 2018 and 2019, the current search team went back with a far bigger dam, a widened haul road, and a 300-ton crane and took the whole cove apart. They confirmed the artificial beach first described in 1850. They exposed the U-shaped structure, an L-shaped structure, a slipway, a French drain system, and a single box drain matching the 1850 accounts. What they never found was the convergence point, the place where the 5 drains were supposed to merge into the flood tunnel. It was not there. Then the wood went to Dr. Colin LaRoque at the University of Saskatchewan. The northeastern arm of the slipway, red spruce, felled in 1771. The U-shaped structure, red spruce, felled in 1769, a result LaRoque described at 99.99% certainty. A large log bearing Roman numerals found beneath the shore. Trees felled around 1770. And a separate wharf in the same cove, which everyone expected to match the rest, came back 1741. 30 years earlier than its neighbors. A wooden wall of tamarack, a species common in the shipbuilding regions of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, could not be dated at all because worms had eaten the rings. The strangest part is in the timbers themselves. They are notched every 4 feet, and every notch carries a different Roman numeral. A numbered kit. Cut somewhere else, shipped in, and assembled on that beach by people who knew exactly which piece went where. 1769 is 26 years before the money pit was supposedly discovered. It is also far too late for Templars, for Vikings, for Francis Drake. It means an organized crew with ships, timber, and labor was working that cove within living colonial memory. Not everyone thinks that Cove was hiding anything. Retired geologist Stephen Aitken told CBC there is no treasure at the money pit, and that the shaft people call engineered is a natural sinkhole in limestone and gypsum bedrock. He also said the real treasure has already been found in the artifacts themselves, and whoever felled those trees in 1769 did it in a settled colony, in a documented decade, and not one person in Nova Scotia wrote it down. Number 4. The coconut fiber. Tons of the tropics, buried under a cold beach. The nearest coconut to Oak Island in the 1700s was in the Caribbean, more than 2,000 miles away. There are tons of coconut husk fiber under Smith's Cove. That is not a theory, and it is not disputed. In 1916, the Smithsonian Institution confirmed the material was genuine Cocos nucifera. It lies beneath the beach surface, over a foot deep in places, and it was reported inside the Money Pit shaft too. The Onslow crew of 1803 and 1804 logged charcoal at 40 feet, putty at 50, and coconut fiber at 60. In 1850, searchers pulled back the beach at Smith's Cove and discovered it was not a beach. It was built. Layers of coconut fiber and eelgrass over beach rock, laid down deliberately, working as a filter. They had been standing on a piece of engineering. There are ordinary explanations for choir. It was standard cargo dunnage on sailing ships. It made excellent rope that did not rot in salt water. What is not ordinary is the volume and the placement. Structured, layered, and buried on an island with no port and no recorded settlement. Then the labs made it worse instead of better. Woods Hole. Oceanographic Institution dated Smith's Cove material to between 780 and 840 AD in the mid-1990s. 3 independent samples from the Money Pit at 60 feet, run through Beta Analytic and Woods Hole, returned a combined range of 1,036 to 1,374 AD. Those two results are not compatible with each other. Nobody should be quoting either one as the date. Even skeptical summaries concede this is the single hardest item to explain away. Coconuts do not grow in Nova Scotia. Somebody carried this here. One more detail and it is almost too good. 19th century workers dug the fiber out and stacked it on the beach like hay. Tourists came, picked up handfuls, and took it home as souvenirs. The filter layers are still under Smith's Cove and were re-exposed during the 2018 and 2019 excavation. Samples are held for testing. The most important physical evidence on the island was given away, by the armful, to people who wanted a keepsake for the mantelpiece. Number 3. The Lead Cross. Drayton's Cross. In 2017, the team's metal detectorist Gary Drayton was sweeping ground at Smith's Cove that had already been swept, which is how most of the small finds on this island happen, and he pulled a lead cross out of the clay on Lot 20. It is not impressive to look at. A square hole punched at the top in the shape of a devotional object, the kind worn on a cord around a neck. It is considered one of the most important artifacts ever recovered on Oak Island, and the reason has nothing to do with how it looks. Lead carries a fingerprint. Isotope ratios vary by ore body, so a sample of lead can be matched back to the mining region it came from, the way a bullet matches a barrel. The cross went to Dr. Christopher McFarland, professor of earth sciences and founder of the Laser Ablation Lab at the University of New Brunswick, and to research technician Brandon Boucher. They measured the lead isotopes and concluded the metal was European in origin. McFarland was careful about the limit of that finding. The test established where the lead came from. It did not establish how old the object is. That care is worth noticing, and so is the method. The laser removed so little material that the hole it left was narrower than a human hair. You need a microscope to find the damage. The numbers then went to Tobias Skowronek, a geochemist at the German Mining Museum, which holds one of the world's largest reference databases of metals from across the ancient world. Skowronek attributed the lead to the Massif Central in southern France, specifically the Cévennes and the Montagne Noire. Southern France, the part of the world where the Templar Order was suppressed. A second lead artifact found on Lot 21 on the other side of the island returned isotope data identical to the cross. Same ore deposit. This is the strongest physical support any Templar theory has ever had. It is also the find whose reported dates vary most wildly from one source to the next. The conservative statement is the university's own. European lead. Age not determined, the cross is held in the island's research collection and has been displayed publicly. Smith's Cove is on the tour route. Everything sensational ever said about that cross was said by people quoting a lab that very carefully declined to say it. Number 2. Borehole 10-X. The Hand on the Monitor. August 1971. A plywood shed on Oak Island, a generator running outside, a cable spooling down into the ground, and 3 men watching a monitor. Dan Blankenship, his assistant Dan Henske, and driller Parker Kennedy. 212 feet below them, a remote-controlled television camera was moving through a flooded cavity in the bedrock. Blankenship had read a magazine article about Oak Island in 1965, moved his family up from Florida, and given the rest of his life to the place. In 1969, he picked a spot about 180 feet northeast of the money pit using a dowsing rod, which is exactly the detail every skeptic reaches for first, and then he drilled. Exploratory work found cavities at 140 feet and at 235 feet, and fragments of oxygen-starved, low-carbon steel at 165. So he committed. Triton Alliance widened the borehole to 27 inches and lined it to bedrock with quarter-inch steel casing. At 155 feet, the drill struck spruce wood and several small links of steel chain. The camera worked that August was a serious operation. The CBC in Halifax helped rig it. The cavity was about 7 feet high. What the 3 men reported seeing was this: a severed human hand floating. Rectangular chest-like shapes under a layer of whitish anhydrite sediment. The upright handle of what looked like a pickaxe or a hammer. Man-made timbers. And something that appeared to be a partly preserved human body. By November 23rd, a newspaper was reporting a submarine television camera picking up 3 chests, 212 feet down. By December 1st, Blankenship was publicly dismissing a rival radio explanation for the hand as nonsense. That explanation had a source. Jack Adams, who had worked for excavators before Triton, said a plastic hand had once been dropped down a shaft to gauge water flow, and this is why none of it can ever be settled. The feed was live. Nobody recorded it. Video recorders were not commonplace in 1971, and rigging one would have been expensive and specialized. The most famous footage in Oak Island history does not exist. It was watched once, by 3 men, in a shed, and then it was gone. Blankenship went down into that flooded chamber himself, several times, in severe current and 0 visibility. He never relocated any of it. The 10X shaft is still there and has been re-entered with modern cameras. Nothing seen in 1971 has ever been found again. A man spent the rest of his life trying to put his hands on something he had seen on a screen for a few seconds. Number 1. The human bone fragments. 2 people, 2 continents, 1 hole. You cross a causeway to get here, past the interpretive center, and then the ground changes. There is no ruin to look at, no shaft with a wooden rim, no depression under an old oak tree. What is in front of you is a cleared, churned field of gray spoil and steel casing, permanently wet, worked by hydraulics that do not stop. At the center of it is a wash plant, a machine that takes everything the drill brings up from more than 160 feet below and runs it across screens under running water so that people can stand there and watch it go past. The sound is water on metal. And what you are listening for is the moment it stops. Nothing about this place looks like a mystery. It looks like a construction site that has been running for 2 centuries and cannot be shut down. That is where the bones came up. The modern search replaced digging with drilling. Sink a narrow hole, wash the spoil, sort what comes out. Borehole H8 produced 2 fragments of bone. They went to St. Mary's University in Halifax, where Dr. Timothy Fraser of the Department of Biology ran advanced DNA sequencing on them. The result is the single most repeated sentence of the modern hunt. The 2 fragments came from 2 different people. One fell into Group H, the most common lineage among Europeans. The other fell into Group T, a lineage with ancestry in the Middle East, around Iran and Jordan. Carbon dating placed both sets of remains between 1682 and 1764. They did not come up alone. Pottery shards were recovered at 100 to 92 feet, and no other human-made object has ever been retrieved on Oak Island at that depth. With them, hand-painted pearlware attributed to Staffordshire, England, made between 1700 and 1800. The remains were found at a depth and in a context that fits no known burial practice on the island, and they predate the entire era of organized treasure hunting. One of the fragments still had soft tissue and hair attached to it. After 3 centuries in the ground, now the part that a lot of channels leave out. An archaeologist writing at Archaeothoughts looked at how the testing was actually done and found a problem. The DNA arrived at the Wyndham Forensic Group already extracted and already in solution, meaning human hands had processed it somewhere else before it reached the lab that confirmed it. Contamination could not be ruled out. That archaeologist's conclusion was that there is a high probability the bones are not human at all. The reported depth of the find varies between sources by 30 feet, and no peer-reviewed publication of the DNA work exists. So this is the finale, and it is also the weakest link on the list, which is, in its way, the most honest possible summary of Oak Island. The most powerful image the island has ever produced, 2 people from opposite ends of the known world ending up in the same hole, one of them with hair still on the bone, sits on evidence that a careful specialist would not put their name to. The Money Pit area is an active drilling zone today, visible from the guided tour. The fragments remain in research custody. 231 years of digging, and the closest this island has come to giving anybody an answer is a piece of bone that may not be a person. 231 years on one small island, and what it has actually produced is fragments, conflicting dates, and a very persistent story. For me, it is the coconut fiber. Tons of the tropics under a cold Nova Scotia beach, and the men who found it stacked it up and let people carry it away by the armful. Which of these did you not expect? Tell us below. And if this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe.